Cool. So just a couple little announcements, Martin. I'm kind of stealing your thunder here a little bit because these are more yours, but I figure since the coffee's kicking
Go for
in,
it.
you won't mind too much. Uh, yeah, congrats to Ezekiel for becoming the third managed front-end maintainer. Um, that's super awesome. Um, I hadn't really take, given it much thought in terms of like there was this original goal that we had where we wanted one maintainer per stage, just to have like kind of one representative of kind of the code guidelines and things like that per stage to help kind of organize it and have a champion for the group. But I'd say we're doing pretty well. We've got three of them, so it's really cool. And the three of them are in this call, even better. Ilya, Ezekiel, and Martin. So yeah, congrats, Ezekiel. We'll be sending all of our merge requests your way, and don't be afraid to use that red dot. Cool. Next, I wanted to introduce Michael Lanier. You might have seen him pop up in the Slack channels. He's still onboarding, of course, but please feel free to, if he hasn't scheduled something with you, schedule a coffee chat with him just to welcome and get to know him a little bit. He did do some quick introductions, I think, on the managed call and the front end call. But anyways, it'd be good to reach out. And Michael, if you're watching this, which I guess I'd have to manually upload this, but yeah, welcome to the team. Real quick, I'm going to move that kind of last point before interesting links up. I would appreciate everyone's vote on this on deck label thing, particularly because I don't want to think too much about what we want to call this label. Whether it's prospect up next, I don't particularly have a preference. More so, I just would like to have that decided so then I can update it in my draft of process documentation updates that I'm currently working on that I can share a little bit on. So if you can hit that 1, 2, or 3 button or make a different suggestion, please do. Cool. Just wanted to share some updates on the process stuff. I know we've been talking about it a lot, especially in the PMEM managed weeklies. Just wanted to kind of share the bottom line is that there's a couple of gaps in our stage page in terms of the documentation on how we do things. We've kind of figured out organically how we want to do things in terms of breaking down issues or promoting issues to epics, how we want to do backlog refinement. Certain groups want to bucket things into the relative milestones or directional milestones, as they're called, which are the ones that say like next 1 to 3 milestones, next 4 to 7 milestones, that type of stuff. We've got a whole bunch of labels and things like that. So basically what I'm trying to do is put together a draft, and I'm actually working with Dan tomorrow or today on further refining this, just to get this to the point where we can identify kind of a set of common principles for how we just generally do work across managed, so that eventually, if certain groups want to experiment or find that certain things work better for them, they can base it off of that. But the bottom line is that we don't really have a lot of this stuff defined as we've continued to discuss this from time to time. So I will quickly share my screen and just give you a quick look at what I'm thinking about. Hopefully you can see my terminal.
Not sure I want to. Vim.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Excuse me. So it's adding more clarification on like what the on deck label is, why it exists. I think part of that, because if this wasn't documented, there was a little bit of people started using it for different things, basically. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify that it represents any workflow stage. That the original intent, at least from my perspective, was that it wanted to represent any workflow stage that was before ready for development. So it calls out any issue that needs refinement, but it could be in design, it could be in problem validation or solution validation. I mean, all of these issues represent things that we're currently working to refine. And so it's just for us to look at to know that, hey, like it needs our input to make sure it's to the point where it's ready for implementation. And so there was another point that I was kind of hanging on to. I kind of forgot. Sorry, it's late. But basically, yeah, with the on deck label, well, there is this idea about these directional milestones, and I know an import, we're organizing things into that. So part of it is that we could build a board that represents our backlog. Of course, we'd have our like kind of giant bucket backlog, but then have these mid to short term milestones. So that would give us visibility into what we're planning to do in the next quarter or the next milestone even. And then we can filter these things by the on deck label to see like what we need to define. And now I just remembered that by keeping the on deck label and now having the workflow labels, you can see which ones are closer to actually being ready to schedule. So if things are in solution validation or planning breakdown and in refinement, then those are obviously more likely to be ready to schedule than something that's in design or still kind of validating the problem with the customer. So that's some clarification there. I'm adding more information on breaking down and promoting issues. So this is specifically like, depending on the complexity of the design, consider using a good discovery issue to kind of just have the conversation and thinking around the design. And then we can move that end results over into an implementation issue. That's one scenario. Another one is if it's really complicated, consider actually promoting that issue to an epic and then creating subsequent issues to help break that issue, that work down even further. Or potentially just creating separate front-end and back-end issues, kind of having like a parent-child relationship. And I see chat here, so I wasn't reading it. Looks beautiful, here's gonna hate. True. And yes, issue breakdown standards. And then of course, like if the scope of work's clear, then perhaps you can leave it as is, but the idea then that probably that the complexity is around a 1 or 2. So this is like general guidance for kind of evaluating your issues. I know we've been spending the last few weeks on thinking about how we can be better at iteration and kind of going through the mental checklist. So this is one of those resources you can go to and say, does my issue match this criteria at all? And that might help guide you to promote it as an epic, break it down, or leave it as is. But something to use as we go through the mental exercise of thinking iteratively. And so I know I talked for a lot. There's more in terms of like process that like import is doing, where they ping everyone on the group to vote on an issue. That might remain to be something that's specific to import. We can like explore that for other groups, things like that. But any thoughts, any feedback? I know I've spoke a lot and jumped around quite a bit. So do you think this is useful to you? Do you think like having this documented will help make things a little bit easier, more organized for when it comes time for you all to refine issues and things like that? Curious to hear your thoughts.
I think it definitely makes sense to have this documented and have it in a streamlined and standardized process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if sorry, I was just gonna say, if any like stages in the managed team are going to diverge from this pattern, we can always iterate on that and make adoptions accordingly. But I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah, for sure. Ezekiel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I guess I had 2 thoughts. I think particularly the idea of having engineering and product both kind of like give the go ahead on an issue before it gets scheduled into a milestone will be pretty good. Almost like a game changer from my perspective. So I think that's really nice to see. And so I'm not sure if I kind of missed this a little bit, but is the plan to kind of lay out an approach and then trial it for a while, or just kind of adopt an approach and reevaluate down the track as we see fit?
So the idea for this iteration is to document how we do things currently. So it's not exactly proposing. I mean, some of it might feel like it's something new to do because we may have forgotten kind of like like with my point about the on-deck label, we might have forgotten what the original intent was. So I don't think I'll present it today with the engineering managers and product managers, just because it's still like a really rough draft. But more than likely next week, we'll kind of make sure we're aligned on that, because basically I don't want to propose anything new right now. I just want to make sure that what we've generally been doing, maybe not all of it, but some of it, is documented, and then we can document the rest of it as well and see how that continues to go for the next milestone or two. And then if we see that there are improvements we can make to things in terms of how we identify issues that need to be refined, or how we can better organize issues and things like that, then that's, I think, the appropriate time for us to discuss like how we can do better. And part of the reason why I really want to do this sooner rather than later is, you can see from this page that I'm sharing right now, we've got something specific to import in terms of how they do triage and refinement. And this doesn't entirely capture how they do things as well, because they have their own separate priority labels as well, which isn't documented here. So I want to try to reduce the need for groups to document what's different, because perhaps it's already covered and we just didn't cover it in the main workflow page. But I think I'm kind of going past your question here. I don't know if I answered it earlier.
No, yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you did mention that earlier, but I must have just not quite sunk in. So yeah, thanks.
Well, I was on a very improvised train of thought, so I might have briefly mentioned it and forgotten about it. But thanks for asking. So yeah, the goal is document things as is and just make sure that's covered. And then we'll continue to see how well that works for us in the next milestone or two. And a lot of the motivation behind this is, like I pointed out, Import is doing one. Axis is also proposing one as well in terms of how we do issue planning and backlog management. And this is the thing, is that, so we see here, Access wants to use direction milestones to segment the backlog. Next 1 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 7, 7 to 13. Sounds familiar, because that's what we're doing here. So they actually do have the milestone things, but actually this isn't documented in Import, but they're doing the same thing. They break it down into the direction milestones. So I really want to avoid groups basically documenting the same thing. Yeah. Anyways, that's a little bit of what I've been working on. Yeah, any other final thoughts? Because that's pretty much all I had. If anyone wants to share anything, please feel free to.
I think it's a great addition. I've been looking for this kind of documentation from day one when I joined 4 or 5 months ago. So seeing it happen is brilliant, although it does kind of indicate I should have done it. But I didn't know enough. I still don't know enough. And it's really nice to see this kind of distinction between breaking an issue down into implementation points for back and front end, and then using epics by weight. I think it makes perfect sense. Just gives some more clarity on sort of the direction that we should be going in that regard. I love it. Get it out, merge it, do it now, ignore everyone else.
I mean, we can I can self-merge, so I can I can totally do it. I would love to be honest. I mean, it's more beneficial for me personally. It might be obvious, to managing different groups, and they all having their own different flavors of process can be difficult for myself, Liam, and Dan, who managed multiple groups. But the bottom line is, I just want it to be documented. And if it makes you feel any better, we've been talking about this since 2018. Documenting that, Martin probably knows this best. We've been wanting to document this for a long time. Part of that was because we didn't, like, there was new process introduced with the whole product development flow and the workflow labels and things like that. So it just kept changing. So it was basically impossible to document it because we were still tweaking things. But I think we're at the point now where that's stabilized the kind of general recommendation of the usage of the product development flow is like kind of like use it as a framework. So on that note, I think we're ready to, like, we've been doing that, but now it's just to kind of properly formalize it so that we kind of be consistent. Now, new team members like Michael can now refer to this page and be like, all right, this is how we break down issues. Cool. That's it. It doesn't have to be a game of telephone where I'm passing it to Ezekiel or Ezekiel's passing it to Ilya or things like that. And it's hard to keep that information organized that way. It's impossible, in my opinion. But
and it codifies it depends.
So yeah, instead of hearing me say it depends all the time in meetings, you can actually read why I say it depends. Cool. Well, thanks for listening. That was 15 minutes of me rambling, so I appreciate it. I'm glad you think it's a welcome change. And with that, I will stop the recording. And if anyone's got any last notes, please feel free to say whatever, or enjoy your morning teas, coffees, or whatever you like.